and now it's time for our second media panel. This is a multimedia, I would say, multimedia panel with a lot of very interesting topics. So the time is tight, as you've seen, so I will briefly introduce our we have four presentations, but more than four presenters, but I will remind everybody to try to stick to the allotted time so that we have some time for discussion at the end. The first presenter is Ross Victory, and he is a multidisciplinary artist, award-winning author, poet, songwriter, former English teacher, and entrepreneur who creates immersive experiences that blend storytelling and advocacy. And today is talking about coding visibility, the bisexual emoji proposal in 2025. I'm so curious to listen to you, Ross. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, okay. I will hop right into it. And I want to share this. Can you make sure that you can see my screen and everything's okay? Can you see my presentation okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So thank you so much for the introduction. I'm really excited to be back this year. Last year, I was reading poetry and in a different part of my personality. But like you mentioned, hi everyone, I'm Ross Victory, a lifelong student, writer, artist. I also host a podcast called Embracing All of Me. And over the past few years, I've worked at the intersection of storytelling and identity. I work in higher ed and I serve as the treasurer of the LA Bi Plus Task Force and on the UCLA LGBTQ subcommittee. Today, I'm diving into something that looks deceptively simple as an emoji, but I think it touches billions of lives. So I want to jump right in. And so, since I am a storyteller, I just want to start with the idea that culture and identity are shaped through storytelling platforms. So first it was newspapers, right? So we had headlines and shared public squares. Then it was TV shaping how generations see themselves. And now it's our phones, it's emojis, it's memes, it's DMs. And this is where the identity lives in this time, right? So I am a millennial. I grew up in 1990s LA and I never once heard the word bisexual on TV, school, friend circles, all of that. And I think we all kind of share that experience in some way. Um, but the digital spaces are our new neighborhoods, just like the analog spaces. So what I'm going to present to you is really through the eyes of this little boy who is engaging in the world around him. And media and digital phones is just kind of like the flavor of the week, if you will. Okay, so why emoji matter as a storytelling tool? So there are 7.2 billion smartphones, 27 billion devices globally, and emoji act as social signals, right? They're emotional cues. And when something is not encoded in the infrastructure, it can signal exclusion. And so what do I mean exactly? I want to show you this visual for the visual people here. So if you have 8 billion people who have all these smartphones, right, and 27 devices, if people are spending an average of 6 to 9 hours a day on devices and even higher for younger kids, and you have all these people identifying as bi and coming out, right, which is great, but then there's zero encoded bi plus emoji. What does that mean? And that is a semantic gap. And this is going to tie into the actual proposal to Unicode. So what is the semantic gap actually? And so actually is a, throw out to Heartstopper, of course. So the rainbow flag is ambiguous in the context of this proposal. And what do I mean by that? Is it a gay flag? Is it an LGBTQ flag? Is the flag, does that mean that it's safe for bi people? It depends who you ask. I also have a case study here from Cusco in Peru that I'll show you, but pretty much there's no clear, universally understood and coded symbol for bi plus identities. And someone may say, but Ross, wait, what about the hearts? Right? And yes, we use those hearts, and the pink, purple, and blue sequence isn't encoded, right? So it's not in the infrastructure of code as being bi or bi plus. These are just three emojis sitting next together, kind of like if there's any millennials in the crowd, do you remember Tower Records or CDs, right? So remember you would go to the CD shop and buy a CD for an artist, but then there's an option where you could burn a CD from the internet. So this is the same type of thing, right? One's a real CD, one's not. And so what is some of the research that I did for this proposal is really looking and deep diving in Reddit. So to see how a lot of us are expressing. So some people are using donuts, some people are using aliens, some people are using frogs, some people are using butterflies, right? Some people are using the hearts, but none of these are searchable and standardized. And as far as Cusco, so I was recently in Cusco, Peru, and actually Cusco has had its rainbow flag since 1970s. And so this was part of the case that I made in the proposal about why the rainbow flag wasn't sufficient for our community. And so this is well before the LGBTQ pride flag became globally recognized, and it was adopted into a city flag. And so as visibility grew, tourists began to go to Cusco and be like, hey, like this is like eternally pride or eternally a gay place, right? And the city of Cusco was like, hey, we love the LGBTQ community, but this is like our like ancestral flag. So what did they do? They added this symbol called a sol de in Chinke, to really differentiate, hey, this is kind of the importance of our cultural history and our identity. Okay, so let's get into the fun stuff. So what is this proposal all about? So Unicode is the one entity that controls the global standards body that decides what characters and emojis get encoded on all those billions of devices. So that's iPhones, Androids, and other devices in the shared global coding set. So pretty much they are the architects of the digital language. Part of the proposal was a deep dive into what was the precedent, right? So what had been approved in the past. And so I looked at some other cultural identity symbols, the hijab, which was approved, the Nazar amulet, which was approved, the trans flag, which was approved in 2020, and also the dumpling. I think the trans flag emoji was particularly important here because there was a lot of momentum and media attention, and there was a documentary that also covered it. And what made the trans flag proposal, and this is all public on their website, if you read it, is that it was heavily based in empirical evidence. It was framed functionally and not a cause. So Unicode is very allergic to cause-based framing, justice-based framing, and that's kind of difficult, right, for writers, especially someone I try to be in my heart space as much as possible, but it took a lot of discipline to like, okay, only focus on uh, empirical evidence. And then there was some rejected identity symbols. The bisexual flag had been proposed in 2020. Again, the proposal is public. You can read it. I want to get to this proposal because I know we are time sensitive. And let's just hop right into the proposal. Okay, really quick. The precedent also is interesting as far as like digital visibility. So Google unblocked bisexual from the predictive autocomplete search terms. You may remember that in 2012, where you couldn't type in bisexual, nothing, it gave you nothing, right? So this is a similar kind of role that emoji are playing. Digital currency is in SEO, metadata, algorithms, and memes. Okay, let's get into this proposal. So There were a lot of restrictions to navigate as you see what was proposed. So again, they don't like petition-based data, so signatures, no anecdotes, right? Which is my thing. Flags, sequences, no cause-based, no justice. It's like, okay, how do we get through to these people? So what the proposal encompassed for the bisexual identity symbol was a top-down angular umbrella, right? Which is distinct and it's metaphor rich for our community. There are also some variants that were included, which is a gradient of the umbrella with a little heart. The first reaction I've shared with people is like, oh, it's so cute, which I think it is. And then variant three, which is a really kind of multicolored, super multicolored umbrella. I want to go back really quickly to the name of the emoji, just because I think it's worth pointing out that they are really sensitive to everything as far as clear and being searchable. So the name was proposed as the bisexual identity symbol. Bi plus is meaningful, of course, as we know, we've talked about yesterday and today in community, in academic context, but the plus is not a standard searchable character across languages and platforms. So there was a really tight restrictions to have to work in for this. I know we're almost out of time. Something else I want to show you. So as I mentioned, I'm a board member of the Bi Plus Task Force. And so this metaphor of the Bi Plus umbrella is everywhere, right? And so I pulled these two images for people in the audience. One's from stillbisexual.org and one is from another activist called Sherry Eisner, just to show how the art and the storytelling piece kind of molded together for the digital piece. These are some things that were just checked off as far as the submission. And there's something else that I just wanted to talk to you about, which is important for the Bi Plus youth component. And so when we go back to that picture of the child, right, absorbing media, I think that's important to understand that when these kids are online and they're interacting with all these organizations and forums and Reddit, they still may have to mask or split their identity online based on moderation bias and fear. So there's no way to communicate, hey, that I'm a bi plus person, right, in a meaningful way. And there's also mock-ups that I want to show you up really quickly here. Going back to that funnel, this becomes the option, right? Do we want to use the rainbow flag? Do we want to use a donut or bacon or alien? Do we want to say nothing? Or do we want to use how we identify? And here's application and use, just to wrap it up, which was included in the proposal. So it's a 30-page proposal. I'll leave a link if you want to download it and read it. But for example, a lot of people, they see two men together or two mask-presenting people. Oh, that's a gay couple. So what does that look like in online digital equity? Okay, you could put your flag next to you to uh, kind of signal who you are in a digital space. And here's some application examples. I like the one with the basketball player with two cats and bisexual. Okay, so what's next? So they are going to say we love the proposal or we hate it on November 5th. So that should be really exciting. If you would like to read the full 30 page and get into the weeds with me about all the Cusco flags and all the other kind of data and the underlying story that I propose, feel free to scan that QR code. And that's it.
Thank you, Ross. I scanned the QR code. Can we share it in our resources documents?
Yeah, I can go ahead and send you a link directly. Um, no problem at all.
That would be great. So we can share it with the rest of the audience.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ross, also for staying exactly on time. Great job.
Okay. I'll try. Thank you. And I see some familiar faces on the panel. I just want to say hi to them.
I know that this is a bit stressful for us too, but thank you all for contributing to keeping the conference on schedule.
You're
Uh,
welcome.
all right. So now it's time for our next presentation. We have three presenters. So let me introduce them briefly. Alice Rugai is a BIPLAS playwright based in Berlin, Germany, but originally from Italy. They write primarily in German and English and occasionally in Italian. Their plays are represented in Germany, but by the publishing house as Fischer Theater. They hold a bachelor's degree in literature and languages from the Università di Pisa and a master's degree in theater science. I'm not reading the German, sorry, from the Freie Universität in Berlin. And they're currently completing a second degree in writing for the stage at the Universität der Künste. Then we have Rhiannon Ling, a multi-industry bisexual artistic professional specializing in the creation and development of politically driven, community-engaged story across mediums. They graduated magna cum laude from the CAP 2221 Conservatory. She is trained in stage, screen, and new media. And finally, Christina Fialho is an award-winning social entrepreneur, attorney, and activist who has been advocating for LGBTQ+ issues for nearly 2 decades. A proud bisexual queer woman, she enjoys bringing to life characters that help shift culture and challenge injustice. So I will leave the floor to them for their presentation titled "2 by Plus or Not 2 by Plus: Mapping Bipositivity on Stage." Floor is yours.
Amazing. Thank you, Lucia. Hi, everyone. Hi, friends. My name's Rhiannon. I'm going to really quickly share my screen and pass it on over to Christina to start us off on this little adventure here.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Rhiannon. Thanks, Lucia. You can go to the next slide.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Well, that's wonderful following Ross. As I know Ross very well, is a movement champion with Rewrite the Byline as well. And like he said, I had a similar growing up experience where I didn't have a word for my feelings. Society and religion had built a culture that erased the word bisexual from vocabulary that was in my reach. When I did start to hear it, it was often associated with a character on screen who was the villain, the cheater, the murderer. We've all seen these characters. Sometimes maybe we got to be the vampire, but that still didn't help me identify myself in those characters. And I thought a lot about that. And had there been cultural acceptance of bi plus people, and had there been better representation on screen, I might have embraced myself completely at a younger age. So that's why I started Rewrite the Byline. And my hope with Rewrite the Byline is that we'll be able to ensure that this next generation can grow up seeing themselves reflected in the films they watch and the stories they read. So our organization aims to rewrite the narrative on bi plus people and non-nuclear families, which include poly families, in film, television, and the media at large. We do that through script-to-screen consulting, public education, and investment in bi voices in order to create lasting social and political change. Next slide. So I want to briefly just go through, we released a report last year, about a year ago, right around now, where my colleague Erin Hammersley and I looked at about 80 different films and TV shows, and we coded them based on the ways in which bi plus folks are misrepresented on screen. I'm going to send a link in the chat after this where you can download the whole report for free on our website. But just to briefly go through this to set up the stage for what we're doing next. But these are the 10 ways that we found. There's many other ones, but these are the ones that really come out in so many different movies and TV shows. So the first one is problematic leads. The second one is gay films featuring bi plus experiences. So essentially films that are coded into the media as gay, but actually you have bi characters, bi plus characters. The third is bi erasure. The fourth is misunderstood labels. The fifth is tragic end. So, these are when we die pretty immediately. The sixth is bi plus as the punchline. So we're always the butt of the joke. That happened a lot in Will and Grace, both in its original formation and less so in the reboot, but still a little bit. The seventh is bi queer baiting. Eighth is bi plus as a plot device. So we don't get our own authentic voice. We're just there to help, another character, a straight character usually. Over-sexualized bi plus characters, and then tokenism. We go into a lot more detail than that in the guide, but this is kind of the framing for what we're hoping to do on stage. So I'll turn it over to Rhiannon next.
Sorry, y'all, I had to unmute. Okay. Yes. So as Christina was saying, Rewrite the Byline has crafted this really wonderful study and resource for how to better craft a more representative bi plus experience on the screen. We are now moving into the realm of theater, which is where I most commonly reside. I am a playwright, a dramaturg, and an actor based in New York. And the first thing that we've had to figure out when diving into a similar study is how do we apply this concept that Rewrite the Byline has done for screen to the stage, especially since there is essentially no prior research in this realm, at least none that's easily accessible. So we are now developing this methodology and taking cues from queer historians across a whole variety of facets. For us, that means we begin with the most obvious of questions. What plays, musicals, or operas, operettas are intentionally openly bi plus? Which writers for the stage were and or are openly bi plus themselves? Which labels are explicitly mentioned either within the script or within the writer speaking of themselves or their work? Unfortunately, at this moment in time, there doesn't exist all that many easily accessible answers to these questions. So we end up going to a more implicit style of approach. A really good way to start this is with linguistics, looking at how the language for bisexuality has changed over time. How may it have appeared in plays, musicals, operas, operettas throughout history in a way that looks vastly different from present day. I mean, let's think about how queerness was expressed in William Shakespeare's time before terminology even really existed versus Tennessee Williams versus now with people like Tanya Barfield or Paula Vogel writing for the stage. This, of course, brings us into the concept of queer temporality, which if you have not come across this approach yet, it is most often defined as looking at queer archives as a space where one collects or cobbles together historical understandings of sexuality and gender through an appraisal of presences and absences, where queer subjects put themselves together as historical subjects, even if done in the context of historical lack. And that was the Radical History Review, if anyone is interested in looking at their coverage there. So an easier way of wording this is how can we look at the empty spaces and have them tell us what existed, what exists? Where are we in the realm of the theater that we just can't see at the moment? And is that absence sort of exactly where we exist? This slides right into queer coding. As many of us will know, the theater is rife with characters that are queer coded. There are so many that could be played as bi plus, even if they are not explicitly written as such. So looking at historically, how was it utilized? When was it beneficial? When was it detrimental? Can it be both at the same time? And so in looking at that, really trying to identify where the bi plus experience is on stage, where it exists. And as we're going into this study, we've realized that there's an even bigger question that comes up outside of just where the heck are we? In present day, why aren't we seeing more productions of bi plus plays, musicals, and operas? And how can creators like us who are actively trying to change that narrative connect? And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Alice to talk about our next step here.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. So as a B writer myself, I was struggling writing my own story, and I experienced a lot of biphobia in different stages of production, like while writing the text, when the text was produced. And I realized that that could be also actually the reason why we don't see that many direct bi plus play on stage. And people may not be able to write the way they wanted. So after writing a teenage play that I presented last year at this conference, where I was focusing on a B plus teenage character and calling my actions parasocial activism, like a sort of representation activism, I realized that we need much more not only a level of representation that goes through characters, and so in Germany there are the so-called like well-made plays where there are characters, but also in post-dramatic discourses where characters are not that important, but we can still use certain discourses. And for instance, like also explore bi-temporality, bi-plus time, and introduce queer politics. We think that drama compared to cinema offers an even more symbolic level of representation, and we want also to investigate that. And we need a network. And I thought that, like, we thought that the mapping could offer both a sort of a mirror or like a sort of a library, but also we could create just connection around the world of people who want to do bi-plus theater. And we aim to create pattern of solidarity and not competition in this way of representing bisexual identity. And we're looking for your plays. So we have this QR code, and please send us the plays through the form. And if you also want to reach out and tell us about your experience or a specific theater or a play you saw and you really want to be analyzed by us, or we may be able to collect enough data so to offer a small scale comparative analysis and find connection difference between countries and cultures. It depends on the data that we are able to collect, and the title comes because Rhiannon suggested that Hamlet may be the first B+ character, and for us it's important not only to underline the fact that as a B+ theater person you're not alone, but you have never been. So yeah, keep with the legacy and send us your plays.
Yeah, indeed. And again, here's all of us. You can follow us at Rewrite the Byline and continue supporting and following along with this work. As Alicia said, there are a lot of bi+ individuals in theater, and we want to make sure that these voices end up being heard and that they are seen on stage for all those little kids, all those little kid versions of us that felt that we were wrong in some way. Yeah, so we'll send the QR code, etc., all the links, all the things. But please send us your plays. We would love you forever. We already do, but we would love you more. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks also for sending along all the links. Also to this amazing guide about how much bisexuals are misrepresented in the media, which is exactly what a lot of us are working on. Scratch, scratch. So, and after James Bond, we have bi-coded now Hamlet. So who is going to be the next character to be, I don't know, bide, probably. All right, sorry, the puns are getting worse and worse because it's almost 7 p.m. in Italy. Now it's time for our third presentation by Katharina Richter. So drawn to, and I'm briefly introducing her, drawn to the intersection of technology, literature, and especially female views on those topics. She wrote her doctoral thesis about the way German-speaking authors use social media. In her professional capacity, she had the opportunity to work at the University of Graz as a pre-doctoral researcher, and she taught multiple courses while also being employed at the Technical University of Graz. Her publications focus on gendered aspects of literary texts, literary practices, and the economic implications of the technological change for authors. And she's presenting today on bisexuality plus in contemporary German literature. Katharina, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Lucia. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Yes. All right. Wonderful. As you already said, I have written my doctoral thesis on the way German-speaking authors represent themselves in social media. And through the time when I was working on the questions of my thesis, I had actually the pleasure to see that many of the authors I was looking at published novels that had offered a vast variety of sexual attraction or romantic interest in their characters. Most of the authors I was looking at were working in feminist spaces. They were successful in the spaces they were writing in, and they focused on representation for adults. So the novels I am looking at and the novels that were published are not young adult fiction, which I thought was great, and I still think is great. And yeah, so there are questions on the aesthetic choices and the way they are telling bisexual plus stories. And yeah, that also ties in a cultural history way. Due to time issues, I have to focus today's talk on one major text, and that is 1017 Angst von Olivia Wenzel, or in English, 1000 Coils of Fear. Firstly, I just want to recognize Robin Och's definition of bisexuality and bisexual plus characters, which is the definition of bisexuality that I'm also trying to look at in the texts. 1000 Coils of Fear was published in 2020, and it follows a nameless female protagonist who is living between countries. She's crossing borders. She is an international character, biracial, and is also drawn to all different kinds of people. The Guardian has described the book as in the following way, especially that disorder informs the shape and spirit of Wenzel's unusual novel, which seeks to capture the vertiginous, multifaceted experience of living in contemporary Germany as a queer woman of color. It is a modestly fragmented work and largely consists of a female speaker engaging in heated, often seemingly directionless self-interrogation. And this self-interrogation leads to introspection, but it also creates a distance between the thoughts and the feelings of the character, and her self-interrogation mostly centers the constructions of identities and families. And another way this novel is centering the betweenness is the that Olivia Wenzel's family, or not the family of the nameless protagonist, was born in East Germany, and then Germany was connected again. So that is one thing. And as we have already heard today, there's the question of how to write bisexual characters and how to write bisexual fictions without falling into the traps that we listened to in the last talk. Heffers has been identifying 5 different ways in which one could write about sexual identity, where implying would be close to the queer baiting that we have already seen and talked about yesterday and today. But there are other ways, as demonstrating, describing, using explicit labels, and having conversations about bisexuality. And what I found especially interesting is that many of the books, as well as the book from Olivia Wenzel, are focusing on demonstrating and describing what bisexuality plus is like and the actions that are connected with bisexuality, but they are not centering only around this topic. Heffers further states that representing bisexuality does not have to focus the story entirely around sexuality. It does not need to shape a story into a coming out narrative or a romance or a story about a breakup, though these all are certainly narrative options at the writer's disposal. However, bisexual characters exist with other complex character traits and have stories beyond their romantic and sexual relationships, which is something that I have seen in many of the novels I was looking at. Wenzel shows the bisexuality of a character mostly in actions, not in words. The young woman finds a way into the arms of several people in several different countries and several relationships. Wenzel has stated herself once that she hasn't been asked a lot about the sexuality in her book, as it, I cite and translate roughly, as it happens casually, it seldomly is described as sensual. It is always a type of, there is always a type of distance within. The protagonist is having sex with different men. She's also having threesomes, but it's not shown in an overcompassing way, or that the sexual predator stereotype would come into action. She is also rekindling her former relationship, long-term relationship with Kim, her girlfriend or former girlfriend. Kim and the character have known each other for more than 15 years up to the point, so it's a depiction of a long-term friendship / relationship, and their the sexual orientation itself is only talked about once, where she is remembering the time when she was falling in love with Kim and has discovered that she's not heterosexual. And I roughly translate again. She was absurdly afraid of our first impending sex, and I continued to tell myself that we were good friends and that I wasn't actually into women, that I didn't belong into the next marginalized group. At that time, Louisa just said, "Are you stupid? Sex with women is the best. What a late bloomer you are." So here we have the intersectionality, or with the views of intersexuality again. We see multiple layers of marginalization, and there is a meta level to just showing the action that they both are together and in love with each other. Like I already said, the self-interrogation is creating some kind of distance between the actions and the memories and the reflections that she's having in her self-talk. So no matter which sexual relationship it is talked about, there is always a distance between what is talked about and what is written in the book and the reflections upon them. So her relationship with Kim and the other sexual endeavors are sometimes, or seem to be sometimes, a little more than a backdrop for her own identity reformation around finding her family and recreating family, and around creating herself a different form of family. Bisexuality in this case is shown as one of the multiple facets of one individual or relationship, and that is not all. And mostly there are no derogatory terms on any relationship or any sexual orientation, but she is also reflecting on some of the homophobia she is encompassing while being in her relationship with Kim. And in similar ways, using similar techniques, there are other publications throughout, like from 2020 to 2023, I think that is the most modern one. And all of those offer some kind of sexual variety that is encompassed in a bi+ terms, but where it is just one aspect of the character that is shown. And for example, in Elias Hirschl, in Content, the sexuality of the character is actually almost close to non-existent. There is one affair that is mentioned closely, but it is embedded in a dystopian world where everything is going downhill and one absurd thing is happening after the other. And the only way in which the bisexuality of the character, of the main character, is mentioned is that she's swiping through her Tinder matches where there are women and men equally. And yeah, similarly in identity, bisexuality is mentioned in only between the lines, but it is one part of the identity of one of the main characters as well. And Mareike Fallwickel has written in Die Wut, die bleibt, that where she has some characters that are falling in love with other gendered persons, no matter same sex or different genders, but she is mentioning all the labels except for bisexuality, which is somehow tying into the bisexual erasure theme. Yeah, those are the first things I was able to discover while looking at the books and while looking at Olivia Wenzel's Thousand Coils of Fear. I think it would be worthwhile to look further into some historical fiction. For example, there are some reference points in the 1920s, which would be especially interesting to look at. And then look at the intersections between showing actions with and showing bisexuality in adult lives while still not falling into the traps of bi erasure. And yeah, thank you so much for your attention. And I give the baton back to Lucia.
Thank you, Katerina, for this very interesting exploration of German literature. We keep on promoting our new Discord space. I mean, it's an old one, but it's been revamped and a lot of people are joining. And we opened a media suggestions, let's say, Nook, to share some BiPlus media in general. So please join and share what you have so far. I know that, I mean, we complain a lot, but there are some things out there. So now it's time for our final presenter of the day. So I will leave the floor in a second to Maeve Pierce. Maeve is a PhD student at the Institute of Communication Studies and Journalism at Charles University, Prague. Her research focuses on the discursive construction of lesbian, bisexual, and queer identities in US media channels, Autostraddle, Bisexual Women, Quarterly, and Lesbian Connection. And she's presenting today on Am I Being Biphobic or Just Setting Boundaries? Great question. A discourse theoretical analysis of bisexual and lesbian relationality constructions in Autostraddle's AF column between 2017 and 2024. Floor is yours.
Thank you. I will just share my screen. Well, I think I'm maybe having a little bit of trouble with the screen sharing, so I might just present without the presentation, but I will just go for it. Well, the title of this presentation is Am I Being Biphobic or Just Setting Boundaries? A Discourse Theoretical Analysis of Bisexual and Lesbian Relationality Constructions in Autostraddle's AF Plus column between 2017 and 2025. So the AF Plus column is an advice column within Autostraddle's content. It was launched in 2017, which is why I start the media sample at this point, and it continues until present. As an advice column, it's a little different. It allows those who are normally contributors or those who are normally readers to become contributors and to share their queries and have them published. And then those who are normally staff writers they become respondents and they engage with their readers in a more dialogic fashion than they normally would. The theoretical framework which underpinned this study was discourse theory, as outlined by Laclau and Mouffe in their 1985 work Hegemony and Socialist Strategies, and also gender theory, as outlined by Judith Butler in their 1990 work Gender Trouble and their 1993 work Bodies That Matter. Methodologically, it took a discourse theoretical approach, which I will explore just a little later in this presentation. So theoretically, this paper centers on discourse studies and gender studies, and it fuses Laclau-Mouffe's delineation of discourse theory and Butler's delineation of gender theory, particularly their theory of performativity. So Laclau-Mouf's discourse theory, it focuses on language, particularly on the role of language to materialize ideology. So it works well with this study, which took a text-based sample, and it also works well with Butler's theory of performativity, as they're both leftist-orientated post-structuralist theories, but also they both recognize the capacity of discursive action to articulate our identities, and to allow our identities to become intelligible and to have them become sedimented through repeated articulation and performance. As a discourse theoretical approach, I will just explain it very briefly. This study was quite guided by Filimonov and Svensson, their 2016 work using a discourse theoretical approach in feminist analysis. They outline the process of a discourse theoretical analysis as an iterative, in-depth text reading of the collected empirical material in order to identify central signs around which meanings were organized. So alongside the discourse theoretical part, it also uses close qualitative textual reading to undertake the analysis. And then just a little more about methods to ensure the rigor and trustworthiness of the study. I use the 5-phase cycle of qualitative analysis as outlined by Robert Yen, and then first cycle methods of in vivo coding and second cycle methods of axial coding as outlined by Johnny Saldana. And then to be sure of credibility and trustworthiness, transparency was facilitated at every stage of the research process, particularly during the research design, but also throughout phases such as the analysis and the development of methods. The primary research question which guided this study was, how is lesbian and bisexual relationality articulated within Autostradl's AF Plus column between 2017 and 2025? And then just to reiterate slightly, it is Autostradl's AF Plus column, which is an advice column, and it is a singular column on the Autostradl website, which was founded in 2017, which is why I start sampling at this period. The sample size was 15 texts, which is quite small, but it is a working paper, and 15 texts is all I have right now, but it's maybe a good base to start from. And then onto the analysis. I will read the 3 themes which came out during the analysis. So the first theme or category was discourses of anxiety and insecurity, the intersection of biphobia and gendered fears in lesbian bisexual relationships. The second category was patronizing discourses in the policing of identity. And the third category was tensions between essentialism and constructionism. And to allow insight into the analysis, I will go through one text in each of the categories, just to give you an idea of what the paper ended up finding. So for the category of discourses of anxiety and insecurity, I took the example of the article, "My bisexual girlfriend only likes strap-on sex, should I be worried?" So the advice seeker has some anxieties around their girlfriend's sexual preferences and they're creating a relationship between strap-on sex and heteronormative sex, even though these are 2 separate things. So she identifies her girlfriend as being with a woman for the first time and having this preference. And the query centers around the writer's conclusion that this desire signifies a preference for cisgender men and a heightened likelihood that she will leave her for a man. So we can see the anxieties going on here. And then responding, one of the head editors of Autostradl provided some advice to them, and she undercuts the foundational concept of this insecurity and highlights that there is a conflation with genitals and gender. In the second category, patronizing discourses and the policing of identity, there is an advice seeker who is for the first time in a relationship with someone who is relatively not new to the queer community, but has come out relatively recently. And the advice seeker is wondering, and this is a quote from the article, how not to take on the entire burdening of teaching queer culture and sex 101. And then this returns to the analysis. The advice seeker is evaluating her partner's sexual reciprocity, and they ultimately suggest that there is a norm of bisexual women behaving in ways that are similar to the norm of what might be considered a heterosexual woman's norms. But in both cases, they're making sweeping assumptions and categorizing people in ways that as individuals they might not necessarily agree with. And ultimately, they are guided by the respondents and told to take whatever path they feel is good for them, but the patronizing presence and patronizing tone within their query is apparent. And then intentions between essentialism and constructionism. I will just read a little bit of the analysis. While those responding to queries sustain a social constructionist perspective, advice seekers often express essentialist perspectives, with it not always being discernible whether such perspectives are willful or cultural internalizations. There is this one article, My Straight Friend Wants Gay Attention, wherein someone who is identifying themselves as a lesbian said that their straight friend often likes to go clubbing with them to queer events, and they want what they describe as gay attention. But the respondents suggest that perhaps her friend is not entirely straight, perhaps this is her method of exploring, and perhaps she just does not want to speak about it at the moment, and so they are much more empathetic and much less suspicious of the friend. And so they open up the dialogue to facilitate a different perspective. And yes, so those were 3 articles from each of the 3 categories. And that is everything from me. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Maeve. Interesting categories and interesting titles. I think we all try to keep a straight face at straight friends and strap-on sex. But your analysis was pretty brilliant. All right, so we have 5 minutes for Q&A, which is an amazing collective effort from every presenter to keep every presentation on time. So thank you so much for this. I know we are pressing so much about time, but it is our unfortunate job to do this. So if there are any questions from the chat, please put them in the chat. If you put it before, I see a lot of conversations going on, so maybe you can ask it again. We can also give you the mic, so if you raise your hand, we can also open your mic. I feel like a TV teleprompter at this moment in time. So while people, maybe come up with questions, I have a general question, which we also briefly touched upon in the previous panel, because a lot of you mentioned, we're all working for a better representation for a younger generation, starting with the emojis and then, of course, theater, etc. So I was wondering if, we can at least go, progress. If we feel that there is some progress from our insistence on, dismantling stereotypes and, challenging the bad bisexual in the different media we are all investigating, or if we're still stuck in trying to prove that what we have is wrong. And then I see a hand. So while maybe someone wants to pick up on my rambling question, I will.
Yeah, I can take a little bit of that. I think coming from the theatrical perspective is a kind of a different beast in terms of this, because truthfully, at the moment, there is just a very large lack of bi plus representation in general, whether it is good or bad. At least those that are undeniable representation. I am a firm believer in that there are a lot of plays from the past centuries wherein the characters were and or are bisexual, or under the bisexual umbrella. But they just were either not written that way because they did not have the terminology for it or had to be more covert. So at this moment, we're from our end in the theater, we are trying to dig through and find their existence first, and really at the point of trying to prove the existence of these characters, and that bisexuality is something that has existed within the theatrical space for centuries. Yeah, so right now that's really our mountain to climb.
I would just add too, I think in the film and television space, we are still trying to prove this to writers, to showrunners, etc. But we're seeing a lot of positive change, and it's coming from the bi plus community itself. We just did a panel, Rewrite the Byline, did a panel with the city of West Hollywood, and R.K. Russell, who is a former NFL player who came out as bi plus, wrote a memoir. His memoir is being turned into a comedy series. So really excited about things like that, where we're going to have really good representation from folks who have lived experience.
That's great to know. More NFL related things, which is not where I saw queer representation coming from, but everything good. I see some requests for resources from Katerina's presentation. So if you can share something with the chat, everybody's going to be so happy about it. Sorry, I'm trying to look at too many screens and I'm too bi to keep up with all these different inputs. There is also some optimism for our current state compared to the past, which I second. Okay, I don't know if anyone else wants to have some final thought, or if we can, I don't know if we can also wrap it up, but Ross, I saw you opening your
Yeah,
mic.
I have a final thought. So I work in higher ed, and my employer recently did a welcome back kind of pride event, and I think it was really interesting. So people could sign in at the table, and find their pride kind of pin. There was like at least 20, and there was a lot of students there. So it seems like that age group, they're really aware, kind of like, okay, that's a trope. That's not, but it seems like, because I'm almost 40, right? But it seems like they struggle with uh, the hyper visibility and all of the harsh rhetoric. So it's like we have all of this visibility, and like, okay, there's some things moving in the future, but at the same time, everyone has like an opinion about it. That's just something that I've noticed from that Welcome Back Pride, because there was so many like pens and buy pens. I was like, oh my gosh, you guys, I can't imagine being in college with all of this. So it's kind of like a from that perspective in that school, of course.
Thank you, Ross. It is indeed different for different generations, and
Right.
we millennials, we have a very different experience compared to the younger generations, and so yeah, we have very different needs and hopes probably.